honored to be here to moderate a really frank discussion with some exceptional experts in the field of education. They all have different areas of expertise, and so I'm excited to hear what they have to say today. We have Helen Jim is the first person right to my left, and Helen is a community and education leader whose work supports the right to a quality public education for all children. She's a former public school teacher. She co-founded Parents United for Public Education, focused on privatization and ethics around school budgets while also winning millions of dollars in new revenue for Philadelphia public schools. And I know if you're probably at this panel, you know Philadelphia has a lot going on right now in terms of their public schools. Immediately to her left is Joe Bishop. Dr. Bishop is the Director of Policy with National Opportunity to Learn campaign with the Scott Foundation for Public Education, a national equity initiative focused on building an opportunity nation for all students. And then to his left is Mary Cathryn Ricker, who was just recently elected as Executive Vice President of the American Federation of Teachers, and she has been president of the St. Paul Federation of Teachers before that. And I think that, I'm really excited to hear what she has to say about equity and early childhood education. We're waiting on one more panelist, and I hope that he's able to join us, because he's really going to help flesh out the conversation. But I do want to get started so that you guys aren't waiting, just staring at us for too much longer. I want to go to Joe first, and then to all of the panelists, because I want to start sort of a general question. I mean, we're all here, and I don't want this panel to be sort of, this is so frustrating, because it can be, right? But I want to talk first about sort of the reform hustlers, right? The people who are basically destroying public education system with cuts, and then running in to say, well, we should privatize everything, and that's the solution. So I want to talk first to Joe, and then to the rest of the panel. What is the sort of the AFT union public education, our side of the fight? What is our strategy for fighting back against that rhetoric, which I think sometimes is very convincing to parents who can be frustrated with their public schools and their local communities? So first Joe, and then you can just take that question.
Thanks, Zerlina. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thanks for coming out on Saturday morning to talk about education. And want to acknowledge the AFT for bringing us together for this panel and organizing us to be here. And want to acknowledge my colleagues, Patrick St. John and Jocelyn Rousey from the Opportunity to Learn campaign and the Schott Foundation. Patrick has his camera going. And we'll keep our fingers crossed that Jitu is able to join us shortly. But to sort of, once again, my name is Joe Bishop with the National Opportunity to Learn campaign, and also with Opportunity Action. I'm the Executive Director of our 501c4. And really our threefold strategies, Zerlina asked me to not give a plug about our organization, but really our goal, and really what this panel is about, is to tackle the idea that people are banking on the fact that labor and community groups cannot work effectively together to cause disruption in communities, not only in schools, and to set up people and students and families to fail. So what this panel is really about is to highlight and illustrate for everybody in this room what the possibilities are. There's been some amazing work for all the negative press that we hear in Philadelphia. There's been some amazing work where parents and labor and youth have been working together in Chicago, in New York, Los Angeles, you name it. So there's actually a lot of really positive things happening. And just to stick with the T's and the P's. So most of the very well-funded, there's Jitu. All right, we can keep going. Welcome, Jitu. The reform groups would like us to focus or think that the purpose of public education is really tests, teachers, tenure, and school turnaround. And school turnaround is more or less code for we're going to close your schools right now under the Obama administration, unfortunately. But really what today is about is to highlight the importance of partnerships to push a whole child, whole family, whole community model of education, to build a political infrastructure and political will to change things. You know, like in New York City, with the Alliance for Educational, for the Coalition for Educational Justice, the Alliance for Quality Education, they were able to make pre-K and education the platform or the issue for the mayoral elections. And we now see Mayor de Blasio in office. And also looking at the plans and the visioning and the values, I think Mary Cathryn in St. Paul, Mary Cathryn wears a lot of hats, but she, over years and years of work, really laid out a different alternative plan to engage the community, engage labor in a very productive way. So I think really today what we're going to illustrate for people is the positive things that are happening to counter the narrative and counter the work that the reform groups want us to focus on, Zerlina. So we'll start there.
Sure. And Helen, do you want to kind of take on that same, the reform hustlers obviously have their own narrative, but I want a counter narrative. That's what I kind of want to come out of this panel. So where does that counter narrative start?
So hi everybody, I'm Helen Gim. I'm a public school parent in Philadelphia and a co-founder of Parents United, which is really focused in on bringing together parents all across the city. One of our main objectives is to refocus the conversation back to children, schools, and classrooms, and to ensure that every child at every school, if you're going to open up a public school in the city, has a guaranteed level of resources, programming, and staff that allows that to become not only an academic environment, but a nurturing, loving environment. We have to take care of our children. In our work, we really try to think through a long history of activism and justice, the choices and actions that we take that have significant consequences, so we try to have a sense of longevity. And the most important thing we feel like for schools is to build a real sense of humanity and to connect with one another, because some of the stuff that we're dealing right now in Philadelphia is very dehumanizing right now. I mean, it's been brutal. On the heels of 24 school closures last year, we moved over 7,000 children into schools, that every single one of which was worse than the ones they attended last year. The year before, we opened the school year under circumstances that most people would find completely unimaginable. We had 100 split grade classrooms for thousands of children across the district. We lost 4,000 staff people from June of 2013 to the opening of school in September 2013. We had one nurse for every 1,500 students. 2 children died in the Philadelphia schools this year, and in schools that lacked school nurses. One of an asthma condition that started in school. We've got 14 librarians in a school district with over 200 buildings. We've got one counselor. We had one counselor for every 2,000 to 3,000 students. And so, those are the circumstances that we're dealing with. And that's not even, I'm just giving you numbers, which kind of glaze over. But the most important thing for people to think about is that Philadelphia is, as a city, of the top metropolitan cities in the U.S., has the highest amount of poverty. And our children citywide are 39% in poverty, and a significant number within our public schools. So we've got, for us, what we're dealing with here is trying to unify a more humane, loving dialogue about our children. The language of ed reform right now is about failing schools, failing children, failing teachers. We need to shut them down, close them down, fix them up, reform them. It's punishing language. It has nothing to do with children at the center of it. So I'll just go through and talk a little bit about, that's the counter, the narrative that we want to talk about is really about how schools are not only just reflections of impoverished circumstances, but that they can actually counter, with the right investments, they can counter a narrative of poverty that our city is dealing with. They're not just mirrors, they're actually, they can be the biggest pushback that we have against poverty. And frankly, here's a great example. Germantown High School is a historic neighborhood in historic Germantown. When that school closed, that empty building sat across from a town hall that had closed down years before, from a rec center that was right on the corner, and you had 3 massive buildings that talked about a disinvestment of community, a depletion of city resources into this neighborhood. So we're really focused in on rebuilding that up to partner with parents, I know that there's an idea that there are sides to the issue, and there definitely are, and we have one. But as public school parents, we are on, we want to be real clear that we're looking at what's happening to children in this environment of ed reform right now, and not so much about, sort of the kind of mashing of lists and agendas and little checkoff points that a lot of ed reformers come in when they talk about fixing our schools. So I'm happy to talk about that more.
And I want to go first to Mary and then to Jitu. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say about this issue. And I'm glad Helen brought up poverty, because I think that when we talk about education, we don't also talk about the structural reasons why certain schools are the way they are, or wraparound services that certain students would need because they're living in impoverished circumstances. And I think we're in Detroit, so we can't not talk about poverty, right? When I hear stories of kids who don't have water and then are forced to wash up in the sink when they get to school, I can't think of anything more dehumanizing. So I want to first go to Mary and then to Jitu and talk about poverty and how that really relates to education, and how we can lift up students when they get to school who are coming from these impoverished circumstances.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. So I am a middle school English teacher that is now currently serving as Executive Vice President of the American Federation of Teachers. I'm also a public school parent and a third-generation teacher. So I actually feel there's a lot at stake for me and for us at this as well. It is professional and it is personal for me. Talking just a little bit about the counter-narrative, and I want to talk about that a little bit as a way of also just talking about those who want to eschew poverty as an issue in meeting the needs of our kids. And one of the things we have to do when we elevate a counter-narrative is also to expose that dominant narrative. So exposing what the dominant decisions getting made are actually doing to our teaching and learning conditions. And then as we elevate that counter-narrative, a really critical part of that is elevating professional voices, elevating the voices of teachers. Right now we are in a climate where teachers are not seen, heard, or believed. And we have to work to change that. And that is part of elevating those professional voices. And that also means that for teachers to be seen, heard, and believed, we absolutely have to work in community. We cannot work in an asylum. And Joe referred to some of the work I have done in St. Paul, heading up the St. Paul Federation of Teachers, and there was a very deliberate choice we made a number of years ago to say we are going to move forward with the issues that we elevate together in community and make sure that we share those priorities. And part of that, then getting to the issue of poverty, is that we as a union knew that we were very vulnerable when we brought issues of poverty to that dominant narrative saying you're using poverty as an excuse. And so we knew we had to do two things simultaneously, right? We absolutely wanted to make sure we were leaders in our city in establishing issues of teacher quality as our issues. So we worked very hard to make sure to say we are absolutely responsible for the 7 hours of that school day and the time you trust us with your children, St. Paul community, absolutely. And we care about the other 17 or 18 hours of their day as well. And we understand that when we care about sort of that whole cycle of a child, that whole 24 hours, both of those areas are stronger, right? Teaching quality gets maximized when we also make sure that in this housing crisis, our kids aren't being evicted in the middle of the school year and aren't getting bounced around. We can maximize teaching quality when we make sure that their parents have living wage jobs. And we can maximize that teaching quality when we know that students have access to affordable, high-quality healthcare that our teachers have access to. We marry those things in St. Paul, and they really do believe that if we don't address that, it's really the counter narrative to, oh, teachers are just using poverty as an excuse to not meet the needs of students. Like, how can you stand to know that so many needs of our students aren't being met? So we are very clear that lack of those conditions, lack of living wage jobs in our community, lack of access to affordable, high-quality health care, lack of access to transportation or food, lack of access to stable housing, these are not the things that keep us from teaching. These are the things that keep us up at night. And so we are really clear that we work on both fronts. Absolutely. We will be leaders on teaching quality, and we will be leaders in our community at meeting the needs, all of the needs of our students.
And Jitu, the same question. So how do we talk about poverty as it relates to making sure that our kids have a good education? Because you can't talk about one without the other.
First, can I get on good paper with the audience?
Oh, sure. Yes.
Well, I apologize for being late. I'm usually strong as a horse, and I woke up this morning sick as a dog, and I didn't know that. So I'm good, but I apologize for walking in late. That's not acceptable. Thank you so much. My name is Jitu Brown. I'm with the Journey for Justice. I come from Chicago, Illinois, from a grassroots community organization called the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, which is the oldest African-American-led organizing group in the city of Chicago, been around since 1965. As of August of 2013, I've served in a new national alliance called the Journey for Justice Alliance, 36 community organizations in 22 different cities as its national director, dedicated to community-driven school improvement. And I'm not saying this to, sound tough, but also we understand that in order to get community-driven school improvement, we have to kill the privatization. That the two cannot coexist. That there is no partnership, there is no playing ground where privatization and schools as community institutions can coexist. So the question is, how does poverty impact education? And I think in 2014, we have to do some honest self-reflection, that we're still struggling with that question. Whereas we're in a city where the basic quality of life institutions have not been renewed in certain communities since 1967. The United Nations says that there are 5 basic institutions that minimally a community needs to survive. Quality education, health care, housing, food production and delivery systems, and clothing. I think a lot of us, and I did for a great deal of my adult life, took for granted that that when you want to go to the grocery store in your own neighborhoods, you go to a good grocery store, right? You go to Whole Foods, you go to Treasure Island, wherever you go. In Chicago, for folks that live in a middle-class area like Lincoln Park, they want to send their child to the doctor. They go to Illinois Masonic Hospital right down the street from their house. They go to world-class elementary schools in their neighborhood by design. The housing is high quality and affordable for what their income is. Those basic quality of life institutions are provided by the municipality, and the folks that live in those communities didn't have to protest to get them. That's just the truth. They got them because they're valued. Now, do you have to hold your school boards accountable and things like that? Yes. But the basic foundations for you to be able to raise your families are there. Well, I live in one of the most, I used to live, I work in one of the most historic African-American communities in the United States, Bronzeville. This is where Ida B. Wells lived, the great anti-lynching crusader on 36 and King Drive. This is where Sam Cooke went to Doolittle East Elementary School. Minnie Riperton, raise your hand if you ever heard of Minnie Riperton. Okay, so Minnie Riperton grew up on 39th Street. Red Fox lived in my community. Harold Washington went to high school and grew up in my community. This is the first doctor to perform successful surgery on the human heart, Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, who came up in Bronzeville. Richard Wright came up in Bronzeville. Muddy Waters grew up, houses on the same block where I used to live. This is a historic community that was called by the great poet Margaret Walker, 47th and King Drive was the most exciting corner in the United States of America. The place where the first African-American life insurance company was born. So this community has a lot of history. But in the same community, while they've closed a record number of schools, we were able for a long time to stop those school closures. I see my friend Kenzo in the audience. He knows that in 2000, pretty much from 2005 to 2009 or 8, we kept Arnie Duncan at bay. He stopped closing schools in our neighborhood because we were organizing to stop him. Well, we have a new mayor in Chicago who doesn't really care about his public perception because we're not his constituents. His constituents is the corporate community. So the basic quality of life institutions, like hospitals, don't exist in the same community where they're closing schools. They closed the trauma center. They closed, and just want to share a little bit with you all about that. How many of you all have heard of the young lady who was shot, who performed at the president's inauguration, Hadia Pimpleton? How many of you all saw Chicagoland with the commercial for Rahm Emanuel? Yeah. And on one of the episodes, they profiled a young man named Kevin Ambrose. And he was killed. I helped raise Kevin Ambrose. I had to officiate his funeral. And when Kevin was shot and when Hadia was shot, they were both within 5 minutes of a hospital that used to have a trauma center. But they closed the trauma center in that hospital and continued to disinvest in it, so that they had to take Hadia all the way to Gary Coleman Children's Hospital and had to take Kevin all the way to the county hospital. Neither of them made it. So in the second, we don't have quality hospitals. In communities like this, when you go in an urban community in Detroit, the liquor store is the grocery store. The corner store is the grocery store. So that disinvestment in the basic quality of life institutions sabotage a family's effort to stand on, for their children to stand on their shoulders. And so what we're raising is poverty and racism has an enormous amount to do with it. We live in a society that is extremely violent. To look at it, I look at it like this. I've worked with young people most of my adult life. There's nothing more precious than the third grade. That third grader looks you in your eye, that third grader still has imaginary friends, that you get that third grader a piece of clay and they'll be in their own world. To create education policy that sabotages the education of that third grader is evil. It's not just greed, it's evil. That says that we don't live in a people-centered society. See, the playing field has to be even, and I don't chide any community that has the resources that we just talked about, because every child deserves them, whether you're white, brown, black, blue. But there are communities by design that do not have those resources, and we have to have the courage to confront it, because by using cowardly excuses like this, personal responsibility, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. All it really does is support the inertia that allows us to be an unconscious constituency in this country, that allows madness to take place in this country. And I've seen amount of state and federally sponsored violence that we don't stop as people in this community, or people in this country. So I believe, and in many of these communities, you have unemployment 3 times the national average. You have children that go past perfectly good school buildings and are bussed out of their community because they're trying to transform that community for a different demographic. So I think that these are things that we have to confront. School closings is not about school improvement. It is about disinvestment in a certain population of people with a desire to remake those communities for white middle class. In Chicago, they want to expand the loop south. And Bronzeville is in the way. And the only organization on the local level that's standing in the middle of that is the organization I come from. And we don't, and we have the guts to go head up against, money with people. Now, the blessing of being part of the Journey for Justice Alliance is that I've learned from a very practical level these same conditions all over the country. I've seen what's happening in New Orleans. This country should shut down based on the human rights violations that are happening in New Orleans. All you have to do is go to the lower Ninth Ward, where you still have streets that are impassable, how these families were labeled as refugees when that is one of the highest concentration of homeowners, of African American homeowners in the United States. And then as soon as you get to St. Bernard Parish, it's like if this is the dividing line right here. You have unpassable streets, bombed out schools, charter schools, houses that still talk about the number of people that died inside of them. And as soon as you cross the dividing line, you have Hobby Lobby, you have rebuilt neighborhood schools, you have a community that's completely redeveloped. That is sheer and unadulterated racism and valuing the lives of one group of people over another. And we have to have the courage to call it out. So.
I'm glad that you brought up racism.
Yeah.
That you brought up racism, because that was kind of where I wanted to go next. And so I want to start with Helen first, and then you can each take a turn down the line. But I want to talk about racism and the access to opportunities, because I think, Joe, I know that's a large part of what your work is. And you know, how you're born, right? If you're born in a certain zip code or of a certain race or gender, you then automatically don't have access to opportunity. And that's really what it's all about. So I want to hear from each of you, in the work that you're doing, how are you trying to increase that opportunity for people of color and for marginalized communities?
Yeah, so, you know, Jitu, that was awesome. You know, just a total breakdown of a lot of what's been going on and a lot of what we're seeing, whether it's New Orleans, Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit here, you know, the targeting of communities of color. And I also want to say that our public schools in Philadelphia are not just black and brown, they're also black, brown, and immigrant. Our immigrant kids are completely left behind. These are not, you know, the whatever fantasy model minority that people have in their heads about certain immigrant children. These are children who arrive here at 17 years old, don't speak another language, lived in a refugee camp for 10 years in Thailand or Laos, and then arrive at schools that are rapidly changing around our demographics. So our demographics in Philadelphia are also changing rapidly at the public school level. And that we're seeing a lot of struggle internally within our schools, that we need to focus in on issues of race and class. We want to talk about curriculum. We want to talk about diversifying our teaching force. We need to talk about healing our communities and focusing our children on investing in our neighborhoods and communities rather than fleeing them. But instead, what we're being given is a whole other set of things. And while you might say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and all that kind of stuff, the biggest thing that we've got going is this myth that somehow choice is the new civil rights agenda for public ed. And that, you know, choice will always be second, will be the secondary choice to having failed at equity. And what I mean by that is, hey, we can't invest in your neighborhood, so you know what, we're just gonna give it up and you know, we're leaving you out, we're gonna shut down your public school. You have the choice to find another private option, but we're bailing out. When we closed down 24 public schools, we wiped out public education in whole sections of the city. North Philadelphia, predominantly black and poor, hardest hit across the city. Germantown, wiped out, as I talked about before. You can just visually see the empty buildings on each corner of this historic neighborhood. The Underground Railroad was there. All of our communities have this long history about this. And so our young children are being targeted, and you know, at least for me, one of the most obvious areas in which we see racism kind of playing is the targeting of black children in particular in Philadelphia for the choice movement. And we're the 8th largest school district, but the 5th largest school district in terms of a charter school movement that's largely come out in the last 10 years. We're 35% charter, 60,000 students, $700 to $800 million a year on charter schools that really don't perform well. But the fastest growing charter sector is what is called, and Jitu, thank you for sharing our name, Duncan, in this process with us. It's called the Renaissance Schools Agenda, which means that you go in, you look at a failing school, quote unquote, based on test scores, predominantly African American, and you shut that school down, you close it, and then convert it over to a charter operator. And that is the fastest, and 50% of charter population growth in the city of Philadelphia has come down from the abdication of the school district and from our city to close down public institutions and simply convert them over to charter schools. And then to insist that this is the way that, that children are going to go. And so we're seeing a larger population of service within charter schools of African American children and a declining sector of children in the public school sector. And so this has been a very serious issue. Now, I will go back and really quickly say, as parents, we've really tried to fight back. And we've tried to fight back based on some of the stuff that we've really been looking at. And a lot of it has been focusing on, this year we filed the largest filing of formal complaints against the State Department of Education for the failure to live up to the constitutional mandate of a thorough and efficient education, including a whole list of code requirements that every child in every school was supposed to be entitled to. And we organized on a charter conversion process, which for the first time the School District of Philadelphia allowed parents to actually vote about whether their school would become a Renaissance and whether to stay public or charter. And I want to say, the thing is that parents, there's a lot of struggle in our communities because the schools have been so depleted. We are looking at the reason why so many parents are struggling is because we depleted our public services to the point that they are totally dysfunctional and that they are highly unstable. We're cycling people in and out. We see massive instability, crime, violence. We've got our staff people, we're at 1/3, we've lost 1/3 of our staff people in the last 4 years out of almost every school. My daughter in 2008 attends a school where there were 99 staff people. It'll open in September with the same number of students at 59 staff people. You don't make that stuff up. But parents at these schools had a chance to vote, and they were told you can either stay with the public school system, you will have no other resources, or you can go with a charter school that's going to, convert your school and give you opportunities. And that was the message from the school district. That's an abdication. It's a 99% African American school. It was the last public school in a historically black section of Nicetown in Philadelphia, and that was the message that was coming out of the school district. So the parents organized, but they didn't organize because of the magical dream of what public is. We're not naive. We're not, we don't have blinders on. We're real clear about what we wanted. We talked about race and culture. We talked about communities that matter. When the charter school operators came in, all they talked was test scores, failing, we're going to get your kids back on track. But a lot of the families at that school talked about how this school had seen 3 principals in 35 years, which had pretty much unheard of in the school district to have that level of stability. Teachers who had taught them for 27 years, people who knew their families, teachers who walked the neighborhoods, came to kids' funerals, went to their marriages, and that those relationships were really the key. It wasn't just that people had some magic, we love public ed. They talked about what it meant to have a public institution with real relationships that were rooted in a community. And to us, that is really the future of what we want to be talking about. We want to talk about loving communities. We want to talk about strong connections between home and schools. We want to talk about the intersection of education, families, ambition, possibilities. And a lot of what this message is that's coming from outside is just intense negativity, hate, shame, fear, leave now, flee while you can. And it's real powerful. So, race in those particular things meant a lot. It meant a lot about how our communities are viewed, whether they're valued, or whether they're there to be exploited, frankly.
So Joe, essentially I still talking about racism, I want to throw zero tolerance policies maybe on top of this because I think it's related and I don't want to run out of time before I can get to it. So throwing that out there as well, talking about racism and zero tolerance policies that disproportionately impact students of color, and then throws them into the criminal justice system and how that's also an issue you have to be dealing with as well.
I'm ready for Jitu.
All right.
So the part of, and going back to your original question, about how we're trying to address the opportunity gap. We have to, part of our role in the OTO campaign that we've been trying to play is, well, really 3 roles. One, to develop model policies to counter the ALEC education agenda. And actually we have many of those in this room right here. Mary Cathryn was talking about teaching quality, which actually acknowledges the role of poverty. It's not just about the teacher, it's about the teaching conditions that we developed with NEA and AFT, a number of other national groups. And I'm coming back to school discipline. Partnerships, not push-outs, to get school boards thinking about, again, the role of poverty and a whole child, whole community, whole family mindset, which tends to be really lacking from the reform conversation. And then early support for children and families. Expanding the notion of, yes, pre-K matters, but we have to talk about and link economic justice to education justice. Looking at access to childcare, family medical leave, and the broad-based support from the time a person enters the world, and even on the front end to provide support to mothers and parents and families, so when their child is ready, so they enter the world in a place that's healthy and in which their development can continue. So there's a policy side, and we've talked about the community labor partnerships work and we haven't talked much about the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools, which involves now 11 national organizations, and we've done 2 national mobilizing efforts in December and May. May around the Brown v. Board anniversary decision to elevate the importance of the decision, really as being central to our democracy, and to acknowledge the fact that still separate, still unequal, even after all these years. Which is why we're in this room, and Zerlina got to that question. On the issue of school discipline, we actually teamed up with both unions and the Advancement Project. I see Duana in the room. And I know there was a session that we supported yesterday on school discipline, but educators have been really hungry on the issue of zero tolerance. I don't think any educator believes in a zero tolerance world, period, let alone, I think most teachers, I know as a child of 2 educators, teachers want their kids to be successful. But teachers have been really hungry for the tools and the time and the people and the resources to collaborate. And the notion of restorative practices, there's been this kind of mysterious, what does that mean? So we developed a toolkit that's really just a platform to begin the conversation of what's the role really to change adult behavior, ultimately, which is what school discipline is about. And it's an entry point issue that's connected to a number of other issues and inequities. So we can talk about discipline all day and changing discipline policy, but it's really about changing the climate and the experience of schools and the students and teachers who work in them. So I think, and yesterday, I know we talked a lot about the challenges of discipline, but there's some amazing work happening across the country to not only pass resolutions to end zero tolerance policies, but again, to make sure that the capacity is in place and the resources are in place. So we can move to a much more, to a non-punitive mindset, which is really at the heart of what we're talking about today, is a punitive mindset driving public education decisions in America. And this is just another example with the school-to-prison pipeline.
Right. I'm really excited that we're really tackling this topic explicitly as part of this panel. I will just own that I know I am a student in understanding how to address race and racism in our public education system and in our society as a way to actually improve conditions for everybody. And that being said, one of the things as a student, I realize I have a responsibility to do is to expose the deep, deep marginalization of people and communities when I see it. And I'm just going to give a couple of specific education examples, and then I do want to move into this issue as well of zero tolerance policies and suspensions, discipline. First, I want to talk about a little bit about teaching, because on a very surface level, it seems that there is a lot of common ground on diversifying the teaching profession. And I feel that common ground is fairly sincere. What I have learned as the leader of my union in St. Paul, from the teachers who are part of our union in St. Paul, is that teachers of color who are already in the profession are treated like they don't exist. So there's this double marginalization in that we are trying to diversify the teaching profession, which is absolutely the right thing to do, and teachers of color who can probably lead that effort, right? They are the most powerful spokespeople for welcoming a more diverse teaching field, are treated like they don't already exist. And we have really worked hard in St. Paul to stop that, to elevate those voices. We have found that our most successful diversification efforts in St. Paul has actually been accidental, and now we're trying to make it on purpose. And that is that our most dedicated teachers of color in St. Paul are people who actually grew up and graduated from the St. Paul public school system, and then and have made a conscientious effort to teach in the community in which they grew up. And we're like, why overlook that as a powerful place to continue to diversify the profession? Also, to expose this bootstraps individualism narrative is incredibly important because, of course, underneath that premise is that everybody has equal access to the same boots and the same straps, or even has boots, right? And so you've got to, we have to expose that first. I need to own responsibility. And then we really need to have a serious conversation about whether we are committed as a society to desegregate or not. And desegregation efforts continue to be focused on school desegregation, and as an educator, that both excites me and it frustrates me, right? Because I want to be part of that discussion about desegregating schools and what that really means. But what is the message we're sending our students and their families when we keep the desegregation discussion on our schools, and we continually send students and families back to their segregated neighborhoods, their segregated healthcare outcomes, their segregated housing systems, their segregated food access, their segregated job access, their segregated higher education access, and their segregated criminal justice system? What is the real message we're sending about how much we as a country value desegregation or living in community with each other? And that is a conversation that I will sit at any table where we're going to have that conversation. And again, to expose the otherness of race conversations very often. Racial isolation is a phrase I come across often when we talk about schools or we talk about communities. And I have noticed that racial isolation is often used to describe a community that is predominantly non-white, but we never talk about the racially isolated small town in northern Minnesota I grew up in. It was pretty racially isolated because we were almost all white, right? So by doing that, we're using dominant narrative language to create an otherness about, predominantly white communities aren't racially isolated, they're normal. But these communities are racially isolated. If we're going to use the term racial isolation as just one example, and as an English teacher, I love studying words, and I love studying the power of words to create opinions and to create a picture. If we're going to use words like that, we have a responsibility to equally apply them. And again, I want to talk very specifically about the criminal justice system because our thinking about that has seeped into schools, or actually I don't even know necessarily where it originally emanated from. But in St. Paul, one of the very first community alliances we made early on was with a group called the Second Chance Coalition. And it was a group of organizations that were working to provide rights to people who had paid their debt to society as a way of welcoming them back into our community whole. Right? And so this is something that we should fundamentally understand as teachers, because this happens all the time. We are actually the profession of second chances. Right? When you misbehave in my classroom, we're gonna have a talk about it. You're gonna fix your behavior. I'm gonna fix my behavior and then we're gonna move on. Right? I am not gonna hold a grudge, and you're not gonna hold a grudge. We're gonna move on, and we're gonna actually recreate our classroom as a whole community again. And that is what should play out in our community as well. And so, but in Minnesota, and again, I'll just speak for that right now, we were not welcoming people back to society whole after they paid their debt to society. We were not making it easy for them to reclaim their right to vote. We were not making it easy for them to get a job. We were not making it easy for them to find housing. What message are we sending the children in our society when we pay lip service to everybody everybody makes mistakes. You fix your mistake and then, and then you're welcome back to the community whole. When they see adults in the community not welcomed back, when adults are continually treated, after paying your debt to society, continually treated like you are still being punished. And so we felt very strongly that that second chance for adults often meant a first chance for kids. Because we wanted to make sure students got sent a message that, again, people make mistakes. You fix your mistake, and you come back to your community as a whole person, whether that community is your classroom or that community is the city of St. Paul or the state of Minnesota. And that has to be, I think those have to be concurrent discussions, these zero tolerance policies and outrageous suspensions and the role race plays in that, and those concurrent discussions around, how do we make sure that, that we allow people the right to vote. Why do we take away the right to vote anyway, quite frankly, which is maybe a different panel discussion. Yeah. But honestly, we have to make sure people have a right to a job. And these things are subtle, right? And they're insidious. We have a Valley Fair is an amusement park in the southern part of the Twin Cities. And very often, middle school students will have their end of the school year field trip going to Valley Fair, and you get that privilege taken away if you have misbehaved, the 4 weeks before going to Valley Fair, right? So we have actually, sometimes no matter what the infraction is. So we start teaching at a very young age, you actually don't get to come back to your community whole. You are going to keep paying for the mistake you made, and we have to switch that up. And I really feel like those conversations need to happen concurrently.
Absolutely. And Jitu, same question. Essentially how racism really, and poverty, we talked about that in the first question, but how all of these things are interconnected. You can't talk about one without talking about the other thing.
Yeah, I've been sitting here struggling with how to address this question. So hopefully, Craig is with me. What I say doesn't make people think I'm crazy. But, I guess at a grassroots level, I'm a history guy. I love world history. And one historian who goes, I think, unrecognized in American history is a man named Dr. John Henry Clark. Dr. Clark died about 9 years ago, but he was a master historian. There was this cadre of black historians who wanted to disprove a lot of the racist interpretations of black people's experience in the world, saying that we were savages and contributed nothing to human civilization. So you had people like Sheikh Anta Diop, Dr. Joseph Finn Johannesson, Dr. John Jackson, and again, Dr. John Henry Clark. Dr. John Henry Clark was also a confidant of Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Him and Malcolm X were very close. And he wrote in his great book and in his research, he wrote that between 100 and 500 million Africans died during the transatlantic slave trade. Now, even the most generous Western interpretations say about 3 million people. And he breaks it down, the depopulation of Africa during this period, and how this continent, which has the most natural resources on the planet, has been raped by the Western world, and I'm using that term intentionally. And that for black people in America, our struggle has been, how do we fit in a country that was not designed for us to be in the first place? That within the infrastructure of the creation of this country, it was not created with us as equal citizens in mind. So the struggle has always been, how do we fit? And no one has been more loyal to America than its African American citizens. No one has fought harder in every war that this country has had, despite having war waged on them domestically. So there were some visionaries in the 18th century from the African Methodist Episcopal Church and great abolitionists around the country who created what we know today as public education. That they worked in New York and in Philadelphia to make sure that not only for America's former slaves, or slaves soon to be former slaves, but that for every working class child in this country would have access to an education so they could stand on their parents' shoulders. So the question for us has never been, and again, as Helen said a little earlier, we're not confused that public education has met its promise. We know it hasn't, because every step we've taken has been a war. Every advancement we've tried to make has been a war. I mean, think about, see, we do not have a financial crisis in education. We have a values crisis, and therefore a priority crisis. So think about this. In Philadelphia, while they're gutting public schools, where kindergartners, first graders, second graders go to, they're building prisons. That's psychotic. I'm not trying to entertain you. I'm not trying to entertain you with what I'm saying. I'm a community organizer, so I'm in the street fights for justice. And what I'm saying to you is, if we're trying to make each other comfortable, then we'll never solve what's happening. They are building prisons while they're shutting down the schools of the children who they anticipate will fill those prisons. Mm-hmm. That's not greed. I'm saying again, that's evil. And so I think the role that race plays is that America has always hated its darker citizens. That's right. And so despite how hard we've worked, my father was a veteran. I served in the army. Despite how much we've given to this country, we are treated as sheep. And the country that we help build treats us, or are the wolves that feed on us, that feed on our spirit, that rob our creativity, that benefits off our genius. Because every group of people in this country brings something to the table, bring genius to the table. And our genius is exploited and taken, while the basics that we need in order to raise our families are not provided. I pay taxes. I pay a mortgage. I sit on a block club, but the neighborhood school in my neighborhood is destabilized. I will not send my son there. So now, me and my wife are playing the hunt for a school game. You know, we rolling the dice. We burning incense. Trying to find somewhere to send my son, because I'm not giving my son to these people like this. So I think one of the things we did is Journey for Justice, because when you say it, unfortunately, the traditional media views us from a racist lens. So no matter what you say, you have to say it over and over and over. I've learned that. You know that when you do a press conference, say the same thing. Because everybody say the same thing over and over again, and eventually they'll get it, right? So we did a report called Death by a Thousand Cuts, where we wanted to look at the impact, and we partnered with the Annenberg Institute. We partnered with the AFT and other brothers and sisters to put this report together. We did listening projects in 13 cities: Puerto Rico, St. Paul, Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia. And we asked them, what has been the impact of these policies on your life? And to an interview, destabilizing children. I used to get individualized attention, not as 45 of us in the classroom and we're fighting because we're just crowded, right? I used to have, now our gym room has been turned into the lunchroom, and the school is so crowded that a lot of us still have to eat lunch in the classroom in 2014, all right? My teacher keeps changing. So I don't have the same teachers I had last year, and the classroom is out of control because there are 14 new students in the class this year, right? Young people saying, I'm not going to school because when I sit on the bus stop at 4:30, I put my life in danger because I don't live in this neighborhood. And what hit me around 2004 was that these people know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. See, Darian Albert, if you all remember the story about Darian Albert, the young man who was killed in 2009 because they closed Finger High School. They closed Carver High School. I'm talking Chicago now. They closed Carver High School, which was in the Ideal Gardens projects. And they bused these children, or these children then turned their neighborhood school into a school called Finger, 5 miles away. Now, I grew up in that area, so I know the dynamic. It's been, as old as I am, it's been there since I've been a child. So Darian Albert and other young people are now going to school in Roseland, 5 miles from their house, and they're being treated as the project kids, not just by the students, but by the staff. And eventually the climate explodes. Well, there was a Darian Albert 3 years before, and Arnie Duncan has this, and you all should, when you think about Arnie Duncan, think about this. In 2006, he closed Inglewood High School in Chicago. A town hall meeting, about 400 people, begged him don't do it. Told him if you make these children from Inglewood, this is when you hear about Chirac and where a lot of shootings are happening. It's happening in Inglewood and North Lawndale and communities like that. If you make these children go to other neighborhoods, you're putting their life at risk. He said, well, we've done a security audit. We know. Edward Alexander was killed in 2006 on 51st and Vincennes for the reason that he lived in Inglewood and was called on the bus stop at 5:30 in the evening. Wasn't a gangbanger? Not that any child deserves it. Wasn't a gang. He was in the wrong neighborhood. See, in a gang culture, you gang affiliated when you get off the bus, whether you gang affiliated or not. Because they're going to say, what set you right? Where you from? They know this. So there have been many young people who are in the ground right now as a direct result of these policies. If you look at our report, it will chronicle the insane number of school closings all around the country. So in just about every one of those cities, you're talking about young people that have moved to other neighborhoods. Again, not provided the basic stability that you need in order to have a stable community. Again, yes, we all have responsibility for our conduct. But as taxpayers, there's a certain expectation, a reasonable expectation we should have for hospitals, for grocery stores, for good schools. And good schools are not a mystery. I know I'm long, let me just say this last thing. So, what goes unspoken in all of this is the sabotage of good public schools. I'm saying it again, because I know some people are like, good public schools. No, what the sabotage of solid, well-performing neighborhood schools. I can give you a few. In Chicago, Beethoven Elementary, right in the middle of Robert Taylor housing projects, for years had over 80% of its children meeting or exceeding state standards. They had a strong local school council, kick-butt principal, Dr. Gardner Lewis, a strong core of veteran teachers. They had a boys and girls club in the school, and they had a medical clinic 5 days a week. So the school was open at 8 o'clock every night. So that place was the refuge where these young people and these parents could circle the wagons and, despite a dangerous neighborhood, create quality education for their children. What did Chicago Public Schools do as a direct result of this? Because, any superintendent or CEO, or any CEO with common sense would say, if this school is at 83%, they could be at 90. What do they need? And meet with the people and say, what do you need? Well, we need to break up our kindergarten classes and our primary. We need some more support for our early childhood education. And then implement whatever's needed. No, what they did is they closed Farron Elementary School, which is another well-performing school. So it's not about schools being closed and children going to better schools. We need to drop that, because they closed Farron and they dumped 350 children inside of Beethoven, and you can check this for yourself. And 3 years later, from 2008, when they were at 82%, 3 years later they had 58% of the children meeting or exceeding state standards. Parents are pulling their children out left and right. That's sabotage. That's not good. People who mean good, but who's doing wrong. None of us would accept that with our own children. Call it what it is. It's sabotage. And I can give you example after example. I can give you examples in New Orleans. I can give you examples in Detroit. Good public schools in this city that have been shut down and sabotaged as a direct result of district policy. So I guess the fire you're hearing me right now is we have to stop playing games with this. Because this is not, for me, this is not a policy issue. It's a life issue. It's a life issue. Young people walk up to me every day on 43rd Street. You know, well, this is happening. I'm going to say it happens every day. But young people walk up to me. I've had young people tug me on my pants leg. Is my school going to open back up? And I have to look them in the eye as a man that they see every day. I don't know, man. I don't know. We fight, we trying. You know, so, because the children mourn when their schools close. They mourn. So, sister, yes, race is interwoven in all of it, but I think the solution is we know what makes good schools, and we have to demand, not equity, equality across the board. And the education debt that is owed to underserved communities must be paid. So we've been pushing our sustainable school transformation proposal, saying that every school should have certain components. And I know I've been talking long enough, but I just think it's very important that folks that do community organizing, we need to abandon the inside-outside strategy, because there is no inside-outside strategy with these interests. We have to kill the privatization movement. We have to kill it. And we can do it in different cities throughout this country. I've been in New Orleans where these people don't have anything but spirit. And I've seen them go to charter school board meetings and run those people out those meetings. That tells me there's an energy. I've seen young people in Camden walk out of their schools in support of their teachers being fired. I've seen elderly citizens, and I was a part of this, in Chicago, stopping traffic in the middle of the financial district, being surrounded by police. Teenagers saying, no, if I got to take art and music online, if I have to take math as an online class, if I don't have honors or AP classes, you're going to address this issue. And so there's an energy on the ground where people want to fight back. And so the privatization movement is not all powerful as we make it. They're perpetrators, all right? And lots of times perpetrators are strong when the real don't step in their rightful space. So we have been organizing the real people to say that these AstroTurf groups, whenever we confront them, they melt. Because now the people that have been pretending to be you are confronted by you. And they can't stand up. So let's stop giving these people all the power because they have money. We've seen examples throughout this country that big money candidates have gotten their butts whipped when the people have organized. And hopefully in March we'll have another one of those situations in Chicago. So, all right.
And then we have a few minutes for questions. So I'm going to go to Helen first, and then we're going to do Q&A after.
I mean, one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit is also just some of the elements of what's happening and how this stuff really, you know, like if you were to really break it down, plays out. So it starts out with funding, right? For us, at least. You just look at what the funding stream looks like. So in Philadelphia, you're talking about 13,000 per kid. 5 miles over the border, you're getting $26,000, $27,000, $28,000 per child. And then that immediately leads into the resources question. So now our schools are struggling with resources. So you don't have, you know, normal sized classrooms. My son started the year with 40 children in algebra and 60 children in his biology class. You're packing kids in, they don't have textbooks, they didn't even have desks to stand on. And as I said, you've got kids 5 years old, 6 years old in some of the neediest areas of the city, walking by libraries that are completely closed down. One of our communities fought for 10 years to build a school in their neighborhood to replace one that was completely falling apart. They fought for 10 years, got a brand new school. The number one thing that community asked for in their school was a brand new library. This year that library was closed down, not a single book was distributed, not a single child got to sit in a chair to be able to read a library book because we can't even keep those doors open. So then you think about the fact that you get into, well, now we don't have resources, Now we start laying off teachers, so then we see a massive depletion of teachers in our school district. As I said, 4,000 staff people, not even just teachers, scientists, historians, poets, chemists, writers. These are the people. We need our aides, we need our librarians, counselors. These are people who make a school not just a factory for, test prep and other types of things, but a learning institution, an environment, a loving climate to take care of young people. And so we deplete them, and then we lose our teachers of color. Number one, we're looking at a projection nationally of teachers of color being something like 5% by 2020 is some of the things that are happening out there, but the attack and massive layoffs of teachers impacts teachers of color all across the school district, all across our state and our country. Then you start in with discipline. So then it's like now we're going to just drive down, because we can't educate, so we're just going to control, we're going to limit, we're going to behavior teach them. And so the hardcore discipline stuff comes in. The zero tolerance, we've got 70, we can't keep librarians, but we've got 70 police officers in schools. We dealt with situations this year where they deployed pepper spray on children in classrooms and in a crowded cafeteria. It's kind of unimaginable until we think about how this stuff really starts to play out. And then you get into testing. Let's take a look at the testing of what's happening. Then we start looking at where testing goes. That goes into school closings. We start to close schools. 80% of the school closings targeted children of color in the school district of Philadelphia. You didn't see schools closing that were in predominantly white neighborhoods. They were all African American, Latino neighborhoods in the school district of Philadelphia. And then you have depletion out. We have massive segregation in schools all across the country. New Orleans, the best example of all. You've got Orleans Parish, white charter schools. You've got Recovery School District, almost all black. Not a single A-rated charter school in that school district. And you talk to the state superintendent in Louisiana, and he testifies in front of a reporter. There's nothing we can do about it. We know it's a terrible situation, but we're limited. They're not limited, it's purposeful. And then in the last effort in Philadelphia, what we see as the end result is that those schools are now being turned over. Their land is being taken away. Those schools in those communities, where are they becoming? They're becoming university institutions for Broadmead Temple, Penn, Drexel are all building brand new buildings on there. We talk about private, what used to be public centers, community anchors becoming private outlets that have nothing to do with servicing the communities and neighborhoods around them. And then, of course, we talk about all the other choices that we make. Prisons, casinos in Philadelphia, and fracking, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that that's what we're talking about, that this, no matter where we are in this conference, especially for those who are like, we're not sure about ed reform and how it plays out. I don't care where you stand on that stuff, but you have to look hard at what's happening in our communities and start to think that this is not neutral territory anymore, that this is about what Jitu is talking about. We've got to go after the fact that this is not, ed reform is not neutral. You cannot be neutral on a whole bunch of stuff that's coming down the pipeline because it's killing children, it's hurting our communities, it's depleting us for resources, and most of all, it's turning our schools into sickening social experiments where we deplete everything we can and take all this possibility out of a child's life, and we watch and see what happens.
So I want to get at least one question in. So let's start here.
I'll make a comment. I think this is the best panel on Netroots Nation. When a country goes after teachers, they have honest to God reached the bottom limit. Okay? And what you have here is radicals. The Democratic Party walked away from poverty in 1980. The political parties work for the oligarchs. This is a political movement, a culture movement to regain our nation. And I am so glad to hear that you brave people of what you're doing, and you're dealing directly with people. I was in Guatemala. They had a 36-year civil war. The Mayans are still there. And it wasn't until 1996 that the country used the word Mayan. They used the word Indian because they came from somewhere else. Well, they were there. They were the indigenous people. We have a war on the people of the United States for the oligarchs. I live in a middle-class neighborhood. I'm successful, I made it. My children are not making it. My children do not have jobs. Thank you for this panel.
Thank you so
and
much,
keep
sir.
it up.
I appreciate it. We just one thing up here. I want to make sure you got your question in. Yeah, you.
Hello, I have a question because I graduated from Detroit School of Arts, which is the only performing arts school, high school in Detroit. And
Congratulations.
thank you. 2008 is a long time ago. But I'm concerned because Jitu, I actually identify with your plight. You being in the community, I work at Central High School right now, and what I'm finding is that Central Collegiate Academy is part of EAA, the Education Achievement Authority, and what I'm finding is that a lot of times on the ground, kids and parents and teachers, we really don't know what to do. I see, this room is filled with predominantly white people, and this is not a disservice to any of you all. I know you guys are in the trenches, but the thing is that the kids and the teachers and the staff that are at these schools aren't white. They don't have the tools to organize. They don't have the tools to combat those issues. DSA was turned into an autonomous school a couple of years ago, maybe I think last year. And at that time, it became, in becoming an autonomous school, it was supposed to be run as a charter school, but it's still oversaw by the district. So the district still has like a huge hand in the way it runs its school. It's a really weird kind of situation. You have a board of governors and all that stuff. And it's really, really weird. But at the same time, those people who are there, like the alumni and the staff, we don't know what to do. So just what can we do? How can I, as a person who wants to be a teacher, but want to be able to get a job. How can my friends, how can we start that conversation? Not only using social media, which I do use heavily, but also like on the ground trying to show our students, show our parents, advocate for your kids. Like, can you talk about some tools that we can use in that regard?
That's a great question.
I feel like, little girls get ready to jump double dutch and they doing like this. I'm ready. But, you may have heard a little bit in the media about how the EAA is under a lot of pressure right now. There are a group of parents here. There's a woman who I view as the Rosa Parks of our day named Helen Moore. Mother Moore has Black Parents for Quality Education here. They are a membership-based organization. They're part of Journey for Justice. So if you want to we can talk after this, I can put you in contact with them. Then there's another group of young men who are organizing what's called the Detroit Life Coalition. And I think a lot of what they do is focus on leadership development for young people. Because, we're taught to be customers. African Americans are about a $300 billion a year industry in the United States. So we're not taught to be in control. Right? Again, that speaks to what our role in this country has been. So we're trying to organize young people to begin to see themselves as the masters of their community. And how can they organize? How can teachers be involved and not be blackballed, right? And so we can talk after that if you want to.
I think you also had a question in the checkered shirt.
My name is Chad Williams. I'm a Unit Director with Michigan Education Association. I represent thousands of teachers here in the state of Michigan. One of the things that I think Jitu was touching on was the idea of privatization, and that the entry into the public school, as it were, is, and I think the question that we haven't addressed yet is why. And in this state, 70% of the budget is health and education. That's billions of dollars, and that is the reason. Now, policy is important, but that's the reason why they're getting into it. And the other thing is that in terms of targeting folks within the public education sphere, is that we haven't talked about support staff, bus drivers, custodial, food service. These are sometimes in communities of color, these are unsympathetic targets. And so they begin by attacking them, privatizing these unsympathetic targets, and then gaining that foothold. And I think that attack on privatization is exactly what we should do, and I would hope everyone would advocate for that. Lastly, is the most important thing I think we can do is simply encourage everyone to vote in 2014 because Dick DeVos here in the state of Michigan, they have a plan. And the plan is in fact to undermine labor advocates like the AFT, like the MEA, so that we don't have a platform to implement these policy discussions that we're having. And so if we can do that and impede their success, then we can really get going on this policy discussion in terms of what makes a good school and how can we improve education. Thank you guys.
I encourage you to come up and talk to our panelists after, and I want to thank everyone, and I want to thank this panel because they were just exceptional.
Ms. Zerlina, can I announce something real quick? Hey, excuse me real quick. Journey for Justice, we're trying to blow up on Twitter. So you all can look for, 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 so you all